Hello, everyone. This is Jacob Popio, the producer of The Apex. In this episode, Jan interviews Ed the Rainmaker Robinson. Robinson is a nationally recognized speaker and has been transforming professionals into leaders and leaders into rainmakers. This episode, they answer what is a rainmaker, share Robinson's 4-step process to make it rain, also, how to win the race, RACE. If you want to support us, there are 3 ways to do so. One is to donate to our cause at www.patreon.com/the Apex Podcast. Second, visit our merch line that is proudly partnered with Envision Clothing Company at envisionclothingcompany.com. The other is completely free. All we ask is if you learn something from this episode or know someone that needs to hear our message, share it with them. Please subscribe and hope this pushes you toward your apex.
Welcome, Apex Chasers, to another episode of the Apex Podcast. As always, I am your host, Jan Almasy, and today, seated across the table from me is actually not my co-host and partner in crime, Mr. RJ Holiday, but a dear friend of my family's, an accomplished speaker, a board member, a business owner, an entrepreneur, my friend, Mr. Ed Robinson. Ed, welcome to the show.
Thanks, John. Appreciate you having me. It's always a pleasure to reconnect and stay focused on growing and entrepreneurship. So thanks for having me here.
Amen to that. So why don't we just start off with, everybody always talks about what you're doing now and everything else, but we'll rewind it a little bit and just say, where are you from?
No, while we're here in Ohio, I'm from Youngstown, Ohio. Went to Cardinal Mooney High School there and grew up on the south side of Youngstown, went to Walsh, came to Walsh with what I call a 50-50 scholarship, 50% academic and 50% athletic. Played basketball here and majored in accounting. Left here, went to work for several companies, got my CPA, started, worked as a controller, worked as a controller for oil and gas. I worked for Union 76, worked for NCR Corporation. Moved to Texas 1981 and lived in San Antonio, Texas, where I was a regional controller for a computer company called Data Point.
Nice.
And it was from Data Point that I stayed there for a while until they were purchased and moved their headquarters from San Antonio to Nice, France. That was when it was time for me to start my own business.
Well, that's one heck of a move.
It was.
Yeah. Man, so that's actually I had no idea that you were friends with my father, right? Until, going on 7 years ago now.
Uh-huh.
First time that we ever got the chance to interact was when I graduated basic training in San Antonio.
That was 7 years ago.
Yeah.
Wow.
Isn't it? Yeah. Uh-huh. I'm a tech sergeant now.
Oh, congratulations.
Yeah.
Congratulations. A true indicator that time flies. It
Right.
really does.
That's what I was just thinking. And it didn't pop into my head until we started talking just now. But I was trying to think, when is the first time that I actually met Ed?
Yeah.
Right? Because my dad's known you since the 70s.
Exactly.
But I got to meet you in San Antonio after I graduated boot. And I'm like forced to wear my dress blues off base and everything else. And
in 105 degree heat.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And but like I said, at this point, I've been the non-commissioned officer in charge of training for going on 3 years now. So that's a group of like 30 to 50, new enlistees. I train them up on leadership values and critical thinking and stuff like that before they go to boot.
Super.
So I've been training the kids going to boot for 3 years now.
Very nice.
That's any indication, of time.
Oh, man. Time flies. It really does.
It does. So why don't we'll just dive right in, I think, to your keyword, I guess, to say is Rainmaker.
Rainmaking,
right? So
yeah.
Where did that come from?
Forgive me. Rainmaking is really part of my profession as a CPA, as an accountant, or if you're in the professional service world, accounting, law, financial services. Rainmakers are those people within the organization who brings revenue in the organization. A rainmaker basically, typically accountants are not fond of sales and
Mm-hmm.
business development. So the rainmaker is the person who goes and pursues the large contracts, gets those contracts, and then spreads it out around the organization for other people to actually do the work. The rainmaker also does the work, but he typically delegates that as he continues to pursue other business.
Right.
So my perception of a rainmaker is someone who takes a makes a proactive effort to grow and develop business and the revenue of an organization.
Hmm.
So
And that was just kind of like when they made that move to France, and
mhm.
you decided, okay, it's time to start my own business. Was that the original concept, or is that just something that you landed on that stuck, and then you pursued it?
Well, actually, it was a two-phase process. When the company I was working for moved to France, I decided to start my own practice.
Okay.
So, and in the 80s, I opened up an accounting practice where we did financial and accounting and tax work for small and medium-sized businesses. So, for about 8 years, we provided for about 350 small and medium-sized businesses
Okay.
their financial statements, their bank reconciliations, their taxes, their advice,
All a
their
bunch of things that just go
IRS
way over
consulting,
my head.
everything that
Yeah.
a small business needed for financial stability or to get loans or
Hmm.
to get financial aid with a bank had to come to our office and we would put those financial statements together. Well, I did that, and within 4 or 5 years, we were one of the fastest growing accounting firms in Southwest US.
Hmm.
And so I started to get this onslaught, if you will, of people saying, Ed, how did you grow so fast? And I started helping a lot of people grow their business. Well, in the early 90, or actually it was around 1990, I found myself spending more time helping other people grow their business than my own. So I sold my business and started this consulting of rainmaking professional services where we're helping people make it easy to bring in business. People are very daunted, if you will, by I have to go out and sell, or I have to be a business developer, I have to grow a business. So we make it a simple process so that they can come in, learn a 4-step process to sell, see that it's all about building relationships, and shift into that rainmaking mode.
Right. Well, and that's what I think. I mean, and you've kind of been a mentor to me over the last three, probably 3 years more specifically since I started. It started with the blogging, and then it kind of
Hmm.
grew from there. But that was one of the things that we're trying to do at this point is convince people that it doesn't need to be difficult. The messaging or the branding doesn't need to be difficult for them to get their message out in order to attract people in. It's actually most of the time overcomplicated. People think that it needs to be super detailed or it needs to have
Hmm.
all like avenues covered and stuff like that. But what we found is we're in working with people. It's generally the simplest messages, like you said, a 4-step
Yeah,
process. A lot of times that people can adhere to the most, and it's
hmm,
easier for them to understand and latch on to
absolutely.
rather than giving somebody a pamphlet that is, I mean, it looks like a contractor, and then nobody can understand it and nobody can implement it.
Well,
Right.
there's a rule in psychology and just human learning or adult learning that people can remember up to 7 things.
Mm.
Just 7 numbers, 7 things. But if the sweet spot is really 3 to 5. So 4, because I used to have right now my 4-step selling process is about making it rain. So it's RAIN. It used to be success, and it was a 7-step process. And I found
Right.
people who are not really engaged in selling, 7 steps was just too long. And if in fact they just had to learn how to make it rain, building rapport, asking the right questions, implementing a solution, and negotiating the next step makes it so easy for them to just go into a normal dialogue conversation, build the relationship, and move to the next
Right.
level.
And I actually, this is super cool because I just interviewed a gentleman down in Knoxville, Tennessee.
Mm,
His name's Jim Cawhorn. Okay. And he owns this company called Graphic
mm-hmm.
Creations. Um, he talked about in his interview about how he actually there's not a lot of people that train their delivery drivers on anything but
Hmm.
delivery, right? But his delivery drivers, they have to wear khakis, they have to be dressed in company attire and stuff, and they all go through a mini sales course. So, because he's like the delivery driver is the last person that person interacts with.
Absolutely.
They need to leave a positive vibe, but then also be trained enough that if a customer starts asking questions, they can pick up on that. They're intrigued and then sell. So,
Yeah.
training all the way down to the delivery driver level and making that process simple enough that anybody in your organization can implement it, not just thinking that you have a dedicated sales force.
Yeah, and that really lends itself to what do you consider to be the true values of your company? So apparently, customer service is a major aspect of this delivery company.
Right.
You may remember a quote by Jan Carlson. Jan Carlson used to be I think it's Scandinavian Airlines when he came in and helped them come out of bankruptcy and become a solvent airline. And he looked for what he called moments of truth. What are those moments of truth, those interactions that customers have or clients have with the company that determines whether or not they're going to have a favorable impression or a negative impression? And
Right.
delivery apparently is one of those. In addition to working with accounting firms, law firms, and bankers, I've worked with other sales groups.
Mhm.
One of my clients is called Unigroup, which is the parent for Mayflower and United Van Lines. So they do moves around the world.
Right.
And y- just like your delivery truck, uniform becomes important, the name recognition, the person who's coordinating it, they want to make sure that they have a good, let's just say, a good posture, a good image, and a good brand recognition and reputation in the marketplace,
Right.
regardless of what phase of moments of truth it is, at the beginning, the end, or at the final delivery, because that moment of truth is what other people talk about. And hopefully
Right.
it's talked about in a positive fashion.
Well, and that's what we've kind of been focusing on here. And there's been a lot of people asking us because we've only been around Apex
Hmm.
Communications, right? Has been around for about a
Okay.
year. Um, and that's just from like Shell Corporation LLC. I mean, a year, not like actually a business model
Gotcha.
for a
Gotcha.
year. We developed that, in the last 3 months.
Hmm.
But people are asking, okay, how were you able to get from college graduate, two science majors got together
Hmm.
and figured out how to brand themselves in a way over the course of about 8 months and leverage that simple brand recognition, name recognition, kind of feeding everything into that cyclic loop to where the podcast feeds into the studio feeds into this feeds into that. Everywhere people interact is the name recognition, and it starts kind of ticking to getting to the point where you're now meeting with clients and implementing. But it's like you said, it comes down to those minor details, right? The uniform matters. The person that's coordinating it matters. The way that you talk about it matters. Everything,
The
every little
small
piece of the
things matter.
puzzle. Yeah, it all adds
Hmm.
up. Like my grandpa used to say back in the day, it's just like if people and this is, he said if people can't trust you with the small things, they're never going to trust you with the large ones, right? And so for us, it's like if you can't execute the minor details of the brand,
Absolutely.
nobody's going to recognize it. And with the way that the world is shifting, with AI, Alexa,
Hmm.
all these different things, brand recognition is going to be everything
Absolutely.
in the next
Absolutely.
5.
And it is today. It is
Yeah.
today. A lot of positive things are happening around brands, but a lot of collapses are happening around brands.
Hmm.
If in fact there's a negative, you have a negative news as it relates to your brand, it takes a major impact. And the larger you are, the larger the impact. So we, ca- it is important, and you have to take heed to those small things as
Yeah.
well.
So, if as we're kind of talking about this brand recognition and sales and brand making and everything else, I'm curious about, you know, billboards are kind of a message of the past
Mhm.
almost at this point. I don't know if anybody actually pays attention to them while you're driving down the highway because a lot of them are cluttered. They're hard to
Mhm.
read. There's a lot of bright images and you're just focused on the car in front of
Mhm.
you. But if we could teleport back 20 years and people are reading every single one of those billboards and you had a message that you wanted to get out to as many people as possible, what would you put on a billboard for people to read?
That's an interesting question, especially for me because the foundation of my business for the last 30 years is based on certain values and certain things that I hold sacred and I feel people need to incorporate into their lives. And
Right.
I base it on a quote. The quote that I would have on that billboard would be individuals carry their success and their failure with them. It doesn't depend on outside conditions. And
Mhm.
then I would have up under those quote four critical values that I align with the word race. R for take responsibility.
Right.
B, A, accountable. Take ownership of those things that we're responsible for. C, recognize there's consequences to our actions. And E, focus on excellence. How can you be better today than you were yesterday and look towards tomorrow for being even better? So that
Hmm.
would be my billboard.
That's odd. And there's a lot of those. Some of those concepts are super simple. And I always
Hmm.
kind of chuckle when I listen to either, these massive speakers like Simon Sinek's huge,
Hmm.
has been for a couple of years now. But a lot of these ideas, and they'll even admit to it, are very Plato,
Hmm.
Socrates,
Hmm.
Aristotle. Donald Miller just wrote a book called Story
Hmm.
Brand, and he straight up says like this is um, Aristotle. Like I took that and adapted it for this
Hmm.
century, but it's essentially how to build a
Yeah.
story. Those 7 types of stories have been around for thousands of
Right.
years, and those principles, the race principles, have been around for a long time. And it's just you take those
Right.
principles, right, and apply it to your
Hmm.
model, and then it sticks for people because it seems to be those simplest concepts are the ones that are the most easily forgotten. And going in and reminding people that they're important and then giving them that model to link it to
Uh-huh.
can really increase the effectiveness of an
I think
organization.
so. And in addition to that model is helping them recognize the bridge that crosses, that takes that model to their application in their real lives.
Hmm.
Because a lot of people say, okay, race, taking responsibility. There's a lot of people when things go their way, they'll take
It's easy to
responsibility.
take
I own it, right?
responsibility. Yeah.
But when things don't go their way, they'll say, you won't believe what happened, what they did to me this time. Do we take
Hmm.
responsibility when things are going well as when things are going bad and step up to the plate and say, what can I do to adjust my thinking and my actions so I get a better result next time?
Right. And there's I was just talking to one of the professors at Walsh not too long ago, and there's a can't remember the name of the woman that implemented it, but she came up with the word shivot.
Chivit.
Shivot, right? Oh shit, pivot.
Uh-huh.
And it's I 110 between the military experience and being an ICU nurse and everything like
Uh-huh.
that. There is I'm people, you know when I first started this, people were like, "You're a nursing major. What are you
Hmm.
doing?" Right? But I said that, and I tell people all the time, nursing is the perfect ground for somebody that wants to do communications
Hmm.
because our entire schooling is focused on empathizing with your end user.
Yeah.
I know how to empathize with my
Uh-huh.
patients, and I just translated that into the communications sector, where it's I have been through 4 years of schooling, and I also have the minor in clinical psych, where it's just my entire background and my at the hospital. I have to be able to walk into a room and within a couple of minutes feel that person
Uh-huh.
out, figure out what they're going through, what they need, and how I need to approach them in order to foster that relationship,
Yeah.
right? And if there's no time to second guess. You need to critically analyze and then start acting. Because if somebody's eyes roll back in their head and they fall back in the
Yeah.
bed, you can't just stand there, right? You have to, oh shit, that just
Yeah.
happened. Time to
Yeah.
pivot, right? And I apply that into the business world. I love that
Yeah.
phrase
I can see
because
that.
it's
I
just
can see
there's
why.
so many people that can't take things in
Right.
stride. And the easiest way to take things in stride is to accept the responsibility that I may have caused
Hmm.
that. My bad.
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
Sorry,
Mhm.
guys. Definitely, probably had something to do with that, and then move on.
And pivot
And
to
yeah, and
adjust. Yeah,
exactly. Or you can stand there and point fingers at everybody and refuse to pivot,
exactly.
and then nobody's getting anything accomplished, and everybody believes that you're trying to use everyone else as a scapegoat
Exactly.
because all of your peers, I guarantee, are like that guy definitely had something to do with it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, so that's an interesting concept. I work
Yeah.
for I've done work for hospitals, and there was a hospital in Austin, Texas that I was doing some work for, and they were having retention problems with their nurses.
Hmm.
And one of the we did a very simple thing. I think that when people have jobs that are in line with their passions and values, money becomes secondary, but the quality of your job and whether or not you're doing the work that you're called to do will create glue that makes you stick around for a longer period of time.
Right. I like that.
So one of the things that I asked them is if they were having new hires tie their values to what they felt the job was. And I saw on the wall that the company had a set of values for not only the hospital, but that specific unit. And it simply said, I care. And I care went through the 5 values that were integrity, caring, accountability, respect, um, empathy. Those are the things they expected their nurses to have. And I said,
Hmm.
when you're hiring these people, are you giving them a list of 12 values that are important and having them check to see which ones are important to them? And if those do not show up, or at least three or three of the 5 are not showing up, then we shouldn't hire that person. And
Right.
that change shifted their attrition threefold. So
Yeah. Minor shifts. If people and the military is super focused on that,
mhm,
hospitals, I mean, any company really is super
mhm,
focused on it. But um, you get to the point where, if, like you said, if somebody's doing something that they feel called to
mhm.
do, way different than reporting to a job
Absolutely,
on a daily
absolutely.
basis,
So
right? Okay, so we'll move to another question here. Um, we have a lot of readers, in our audience, and so I'm gonna have you pick a book that has influenced, and I'll expand it beyond business decisions, right?
okay,
We'll just say a book that has influenced your life in the last decade that somebody should read, and it can't be Million Dollar Rainmaker.
okay. I don't know why not.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm going to tie that around something you said. You had
Okay.
mentioned the book on storytelling.
Hmm.
Storytelling is not a new concept at all. Matter of fact, if you go to scriptures, Christ used storytelling and parables to to share most of the concepts of his teachings.
Right.
So there was a book called The Instant Millionaire. Has nothing to do with money, has everything to do with mindset. So I read
Mm.
a book called The Instant Millionaire by Mark Fisher, probably some 25 years ago, that had a major impact on me to the extent that 3 of the 4 books I've written has been in parable format to do just
Mm.
that, to tell a story so that people can find themselves in that story so that they can actually move towards some action or some call to action based on a parable they have. Or the whole
Right.
thing on the instant millionaire takes people through all their fears, all their challenges. And that book allowed me to see things that were in my blind spots that came very I became very focused on, and recognizing that a lot of people have blind spots. And when you can acknowledge those blind spots and people put it in story form, that story form, if it has some universal appeal, it comes to you. So the book I would pick would be The Instant Millionaire, along with the scriptures, or whether it's Bible, the Quran. You look at it, there's all types of parables that are teaching
Yeah.
lessons.
And like with storytelling, being and you said it very well right there, that people can find themselves in the
Mhm.
story. That's what makes music a universal concept.
Absolutely.
People can find themselves in music and songs. Um, I think just human nature is to try to identify a relationship with another person,
Hmm.
right? And so one of the best ways that we can do that is through telling stories or through music
Hmm.
or being vulnerable. That's one of the principles that I talk about all the time with the apex communications is when you are communicating, if people feel as if you're being either facetious
Hmm.
or you're not being true to what your actual thought process is, because we know that there's people that say one thing and their actions are
Hmm.
different, right? And so I tell people, I was like, if you're going to put out communication with
Hmm.
this, if you're going to put out a show, you're going to put out this, do is that a direct reflection of how you actually
Right.
operate? Because if it's not, then the show probably isn't going to do super well because it may take off for a small amount of
Right.
time, but we live in a world that is very interconnected and you can find a crazy amount of crap on
Hmm.
Google. So it's like back in the day, the marketing scheme for a product
Hmm.
was flashy, biggest ad
Hmm.
possible. You know, the person that had the coolest looking paper
Right.
ad was a person that sold the most product, even if that product was crap.
Hmm.
Because it took so long for people to delegate out that this is a crap
Hmm.
product that they could sell enough volume and then put out, oh, sorry, we know that product is crap here. We fixed this one issue. We're going to put out the next version. Now, if you have a crap product or you're a crap person, you put that out on the internet, you get 1-star reviews on Amazon, nobody buys your stuff
Yeah.
because that feedback is instantaneous. And that storytelling and allowing people to come in and find themselves in your
Hmm.
story, as long as that story is true to what you stand for, like you said, it's based off of those internal values.
Hmm.
A lot of times they're successful.
Absolutely. I have a philosophy that I try to live to, and here's one. Several philosophies, but here's one. For instance, I had a pretty tough summer. When you have tough times, you go back to whatever is your truth. And one of my truths comes from a guy who I have a lot of respects for. His name was Carl Hammerschlag. And Carl did a speech one time, and it was called, How Do You Come to Every Day with Joy? And coming to every day with joy is an exercise in going back to whatever your truth is. And if you share your truth and you're transparent to your truth, it makes your mind keeps your mind in balance. So you don't have to worry about what you said because you know it came from the truth of your heart and you don't have to remember as much. And if you can be authentic to whatever that purpose is, your truth, your joy, your passion, you really don't have to reboot and say, what was I thinking? What did I do? So collectively, if in fact you can be honest and be true to you
Hmm.
and be true to the conversation you're having, it just makes you have to remember less. And
Right.
when you remember
Right.
less, it keeps your mind free of garbage.
Yeah. And you're able to focus more,
Absolutely.
I think, on the things that actually matter. There's a lot of, and we see it in we don't have a mental health unit. Well, we have a mental health unit, but a lot of patients with psychological issues are being delegated out throughout the
Hmm.
hospital systems, and that's happening nationwide. But sometimes those people that come in are so caught up in alternate types of realities or and that's a diagnosed mental
Hmm.
illness. Um, we sometimes put ourselves in a state that is almost like that diagnosed mental illness where we have 4 different storylines happening at
Hmm.
once and now we can't figure out which storyline we're supposed to be acting as. Whereas, like, I mean, I'm sitting in this interview in jeans and cowboy
Hmm.
boots, right? And I go to meetings in jeans and cowboy boots the majority of the time. If I get invited to an event, I'll dress
Hmm.
up, but that's
Yeah.
me, and I've been kind of true to that since we
Hmm.
started the company, where it's just I this is my
Hmm.
storyline. I know what I know. I know that I'm young. I know that I have this going on, but people have been latching onto it where it's just, okay, I know what to
Hmm.
expect. The authenticity is there.
Yeah, there's a fine line between your truth and the essence of who you are
Hmm.
to respecting who you're speaking to or who you're meeting to.
Exactly. Yep.
I mean,
And that's where if somebody is, putting on an event, my rule of thumb is if I invite you to my event, this is where I
right,
am. If you're inviting me to your event and I know what the rapport is going to be
hmm
at that event, I've got a designated
right,
wardrobe for that
right.
kind of stuff.
I give you, for instance, I've spoken over 46 countries, different atmospheres. I have spoken in Hawaii on a multiple times. Today, I will never wear a suit into Hawaii and do it because it is such a casual event. Um, and one time, I wore a suit and tie and got my tie cut off, recognizing that you have to adhere to um, the business attire of the day, and sometimes it's just a shirt and pair of slacks with a sport coat,
Right.
as opposed to the tie. And um, you're going for their comfort, not your comfort.
Exactly. Exactly. The UOD, the uniform of the
Yeah.
day. Yeah. Okay. Well, what is, and we'll split this up into a couple of different arenas
Okay.
here. We always talk about money, time, and energy, right? Those are
Hmm.
kind of, if you can almost always have two of the three, but it's kind of you can't really have an equilateral triangle
Hmm.
almost. You can have a lot of time and money, but then you don't have a lot of energy, or you have a lot of energy but not a lot of money and time because you're sleeping a lot,
Yeah.
you know. So, if you had to pick one of the best investments that you've ever made, it can be of either money, time, or energy, but or it could be all three
Hmm.
if that's what you choose. So,
Energy, money, and time.
energy, money, and time, one of the best investments you've
Um,
ever made.
I'll tell you, 1980, it all shifted for
Hmm.
me. 1980 was the birth of my first son. You become a parent and you have children, all of my money, my time, and my interests shifted to investing in their success. Um, as you know, I'm on the board of directors for the university, and
And for those listening, that's Walsh University here in North Canton.
the new president shared a an acronym that I was not familiar with, but it reflected, if you will, the avatar of our future enrollees. But I also found myself in that, and it was called Fly.
Hmm.
And I'm hoping I'm not out of school saying this because it was mentioned in a board meeting, and I'm sure he has reflected it in the past. But first generation low income.
Hmm.
And that seems to be one of the things that we focus on is bringing those first generation students here to create a different lifestyle and a different, let's just say, a different success story for those we bring here. So I came as a first generation, my family going to college, but I created my three boys. My oldest son is in the C suite for a major bank out of Charlotte. My middle son owns a um, recruiting and staffing company for IT. I'm out of Texas. And my youngest son, I always call him my baby. My baby is 6'7", 285 pounds, and 32 years old. Um,
Yeah.
and he's a vice president for of sales for a payroll company. And I bring that because one of the things my grandmother always said was education will get you to where you want to be.
Hmm.
And if you pay attention to something that constantly educates you, it will give you the leverage or the springboard to your own successes and the successes of generation beyond you. So I feel as though um, my best investment has ever been is investing in my kids And it's not just time and money, but the love, the energy to their success. And at the same time, giving them the wings to fly to be successful.
Right.
And once you have done that, it liberates you. I feel as though I can leave this planet knowing that I have developed a better, let's just say, succession plan of my generation.
It's like yeah, it's like your legacy
Most
almost.
definitely, most definitely.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter how much money I accumulated. I have developed a model of success in my family, so that my sons. I have a grandson who's a sophomore at the University of North Carolina, who in pre-law. I know that he's on that same pattern of future success.
Right. Yeah, it's being the when I gave the commencement address at Walsh in 2018, one of the lines that I
Hmm.
used was, if you're proud of your last name, go out into the world and represent it well.
Absolutely.
If you're not proud of your last name, be the one to change the perception of your last
Uh,
name.
Huge message. Huge message.
And pushing that out and just saying, listen, you're sitting in this graduation
Hmm.
chair. Whether you believed you were going to make it here or not, you're going to walk across the stage and you're going to get a diploma. That diploma is either going to hang on a wall and be the peak of your accomplishment, which is where the whole apex concept came
Hmm.
from. This is either going to be your
Hmm.
apex, which means that after this point, there's no direction to go but
Hmm.
down, because that's the highest point of any path or
Hmm.
object, or you can take it and run with it, figure out what's next. And if what's next isn't what you expected, shiv it, move on to the
Hmm.
next thing, and just keep
Hmm.
moving. But creating that legacy, that if you come from a place that traditionally your last name has not meant positive things, you can be the one to shift that culture change. And you shifted it. You know,
Hmm.
you took it maybe. And the thing is that low income and stuff like that, that doesn't mean that your last name has negative connotations or anything like
No,
that.
not at all.
My dad was one of the first ones in his family to go to
Hmm.
school as well. Outside, well, his older sister beat him. Janet went to
Yeah.
school. But my family's 90% blue
Hmm.
collar. You know, we're all farmers,
Hmm.
mechanics, all workers and stuff.
Which
And
I might add, 90% blue collar is a great livelihood. There's
oh yeah,
absolutely nothing to look down at on that.
and
But
we're
you're
actually starting it.
creating a legacy
Hmm.
in that blue collar space.
Oh yeah, my uncle that owns Canton South
Hmm.
Automotive has people that have been bringing their cars to him since the '80s because they believe in what he does. And what we're actually starting a new show called the Working Class
Uh-huh.
Hump, right? And so it's kind of a play on Hump Day, but it's an acronym, and the acronym is escaping me currently. But the plan is taking people that are upper level, either upper level executives, or like we've interviewed an ESPN announcer
Hmm.
at this point, and taking them and talking about how they still believe in those working class
Hmm.
concepts. We're going to be interviewing a gentleman that talked about in his pre-interview about what it was like being on welfare and living in a house with the electricity shut
Yeah,
off, and how he still adheres to those values that he learned then, now in his suite as he flies around. Right. But it's bringing people back, that no one ever forgets that blue collar root. And that's kind of the key that gives the upper level work ethic.
absolutely. One of the things that I shared several colleagues is I never knew I was poor until I went to college,
Mm-hmm.
because we were a happy, loving family that spent time together. And that's really all you need to be successful.
Right.
But then you start defining what things you want out of life. And that allows you to leverage the things that you know and what you do. One of my favorite success stories from a business standpoint is Discount Tire. Do we have Discount Tires in this area?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's
I'm
a
not
couple.
sure if you're aware of that. They have created a culture, which I would even say is much like your uncle's culture at, what did you say,
Canton
Ken
South
South Auto.
Automotive. Yep.
Their culture is everyone who works for Discount Tire has the potential to own their own store.
Hmm.
And own their own store and to be a manager of that store with a six-figure revenue or a six-figure income. And if you go there and have a tire change or have new tires or even have the air checked on your tires, you are going to be met with such devoted service, and it is a genuine desire to make you feel better.
Right.
And I have never been there, and I have taken many a car to a discount tire. I have never been there and been disappointed by the customer service that people provide
Mm.
because they're always looking at taking care of you because their next step is to be in charge
Mm.
and to teach those concepts to the people under
Right.
them. I love being in that environment.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. I didn't know that. I'm definitely going to do some research into
Check it
discount
out.
tire at
Check
this
it
point.
out.
That's cool. That's a really cool
It really
concept.
is.
So we're gonna to just wrap this up here, and I'll end it. And we kind of talked about legacy and your biggest investments of time and everything like that. We'll talk about, to wrap it up, if you had to give a piece of advice to a driven person about to enter the world of entrepreneurship or just the workplace, what advice would that be? And what advice should they ignore if they're trying to enter that world of entrepreneurship?
Wow, that's a big question, tough question, and it's a question that I could probably spend an hour on. So
Right.
I'm going to
Yeah.
try to shorten that, and I'll use a story. Um, Quick story.
Parable.
It's not really a parable because it reflects Apex. It reflects you.
Okay. Okay.
One of the things that I say is the foundation of any growth of any organization is your ability to reach a community who sees value in what you do.
Mm-hmm.
How do you do that? Newsletters, um, posting, etc. I think one
Right.
of the major things you can do is what you're doing, and having a podcast that can go out to a community, and that community having a better understanding of what you're doing and what solutions you're bringing to the marketplace. So
Right.
if that podcast is creating a general education to a group of people, a community of folks, you're now starting to be perceived as a thought leader. Now that I have a connection to you by being in your community, whenever I have a desire for a thought leader, I'm going to reach out to somebody I'm familiar with, the person who's doing the podcast, the person who's doing the newsletter, the person who's out there on the front end saying, let me give you solutions without wanting anything back. I think the world today is filled with too many Googleologists where they will Google
Yeah.
everything and think that they have the answer to some of their challenges. And they don't have the bandwidth, if you will, to make all the connections. By having a podcast, by having some type of community and you're teaching and educating that community, you're automatically building in a marketing plan for people who may want to do what you're doing or utilize your service. I
Right.
say that I talk about marketing 401, and I call it IEEO. Interrupt people's thinking. You do that with a podcast. You interrupt what they're
Mm-hmm.
thinking today and bringing new thoughts into their mind. You engage them. You ask them questions. You allow them to comment on your podcast. Then you educate them by giving them new concepts, innovative solutions to problems they may have had in the past. And then you make an offer to try us out, try this on, see if it fits you. And if
Mm-hmm.
so, they become a fan for life. And when they become a fan for life, they become part of your tribe. And when they become part of your tribe, you can go anywhere with it.
That's awesome. I love that. So, thanks for coming on. I appreciate it. I know that we've got our separate ways. We got to go here at 10:30, but that was a perfect way to kind of wrap up everything. Is just what and we've talked about this a
Mhm.
couple of times in the past year or two, that the true belief is adding value.
You really do.
If you can bring value to somebody's life and change their, you can interrupt that pathway that they're on, like you
Hmm.
said, and change that
Hmm.
pathway for them for the better. It's a lot easier than them running into a wall and having to shiv it themselves,
Exactly.
right?
Most definitely.
If we can kind of help them along and push them in the right direction, it's a lot easier than them running into the wall. And I think that that's just what Apex is trying to do. It's what you've done and continue to do, is adding value to people's lives.
I hope we've been able to add some value to your audience and your listeners. And if I can ever be of help, I'm easily reached at ed@edspeaks.com. And let me know if I can ever be of service to you, my friend.
Perfect.
Okay.
And for those of you listening, keep chasing that Apex.